Either we have an altruistic interest in better protecting the planet because it's good for our health, for the health of the environment, or because there are going to be costs. So again, from the corporate perspective, if we don't better control the way that we treat and use our environment, the way that we manage natural resources, in the medium term, there are going to be costs. It's very likely that as Copenhagen continues to move forward, there will be a set of binding constraints that will be placed on countries. And as countries are bound to certain emissions targets, they by definition are going to begin to disaggregate these targets and impose limits on companies. That means you. So when these limits are imposed, it may restrict your ability to conduct business as usual and will impose costs. Now, in many countries, these costs can be very significant. In Western Europe, in the United States, the costs of uncontrolled pollution can be extraordinary. Millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. Exxon, as a result of the Exxon Valdez spill more than a decade ago, had to invest more than $1 billion in the cleanup. Now, that's an extreme case, an extraordinary circumstance, but I think it's emblematic of what was the circumstance a decade and a half ago. And if a decade and a half ago we were willing to impose punitive sanctions against companies, I think we're going to see this much more in the mainstream with a variety of administrative and other sanctions for environmental malpractice, if you will. Investment in future development. This was the fourth principle that we had looked at in another country. And the investment in future development, again, gets back to the notion of a country's policy towards investment in education that, of course, is financed by tax revenues. But it also relates to how you recruit, train, and retain your workforce. We work in a knowledge-based, or we want to work in a knowledge-based economy. This is something that we hear recurrently from the government officials in Serbia. Božo Želić is very much on the front line of pushing for a knowledge-based economy. And a knowledge-based economy is one that can compete, one that can market, can export, can trade more actively, will innovate in new products, financial products, manufactured products, and others. And so this, again, if we trust the public sector to train up this workforce, we're probably not going to be able to realize all of our objectives. The cutting edge in corporate thinking, in the manufacturing sector, in all other sectors, is going to be with the corporations. I myself, when I went to graduate school, I was at the University of Michigan. The University of Michigan had an excellent engineering school, but part of the reason it was excellent is because it had very, very close ties with the automotive industry. And so the students were employed through a variety of grants from GM, from Ford, from Chrysler, in doing cutting-edge research for the companies. So the companies themselves were innovating, were developing new cutting-edge products only because of their relationship with education. So whereas they themselves may have had internal training programs, they also used the external environment in the tertiary education system in the universities to help continue and further that initiative. I'll digress just momentarily on this note because the United Nations has recently launched a program called the Youth Employment and Migration Program. And so for the corporates who are interested to bring young people on board to begin training them in whatever your respective field may be, the Youth Employment Migration Program can provide grants to make that more possible. We recognize that training programs are expensive. We recognize that the development of curriculum, the establishment of scopes of work or terms of reference for all these interns takes time away from the core business. But we would certainly argue that it is your core business to train the next generation of employees that will carry your corporations and the Serbian economy forward. And so with that, I'll certainly refer you to Steva Vojosinovic, my colleague, who can assist you if this might be of interest to you and your corporation to bring on interns for the purpose of identifying future employees. Humane and ethical humane and ethical behavior is the fifth of the policies that we had advanced that basically gets to a code of conduct. If we want to practice corporate social responsibility, corporates need to act ethically. And what that comes down to is a signal from management, from the top layer of every corporate, to act in a way that respects the variety of rights, values, and virtues that we care about. Employees will model the behavior of their leaders. And if the leaders are acting ethically, then so too will the corporation. Unethical behavior can certainly last for a while. In the United States in the late 90s, you'll all probably remember a couple companies, including Enron, Global Crossing, WorldCom, and all of them were the darlings of Business Week and of Wall Street for about 3 or 5 years. But at the end of those 3 or 5 years, things became unraveled. It became clear that the reason for their success had to do with malfeasance, with misrepresentation of data, with accounting fraud. None of those 3 companies exist today. All of them are out of business, and they're not the only 3. There are others who similarly thought that unethical behavior was a long-term strategy, and they were proven absolutely wrong. So for corporates, this means management needs to exercise ethical behavior, institutionalizing this in codes of conduct or codes of ethics, having internal audit programs, having whistleblower facilities for staff who may want to report, and again, these would be confidential and anonymous if you choose to go the anonymous route. Otherwise, they can be fully open. But again, these are ways for corporates to reinforce through their behavior that they expect all staff to act ethically and with respect for one another and for the society. But the last point, and this again gets to the point of where I myself believe strongly that a healthy company with a strong bottom line is going to have far greater latitude to be a good corporate citizen. And so this last principle was couched in language that was, again, acceptable or agreeable to a constituency of public and NGO partners, but it talks about ensuring fruitful productivity and efficiency. So what this means is companies need to be able to make a profit. If companies are not generating profits, they don't have retained earnings to invest in growth, to invest in training, to invest in new ideas, in research and development. And the global compact that the UN has presented enshrines all of the prior values, but it doesn't really emphasize the profit motive as much as I think is necessary.